Don't stay just because you're comfortable, which again, I appreciate is easy to say, hard to do. But if you are let's say you're at a mid-sized company and you're acquired by a much bigger firm and you notice some drastic cultural differences, like your gut is telling you what you need to do. And those things do not get better. They're not different.
Welcome to Rep Matters, a podcast for sales professionals who are eager to build their business acumen and become top performers. In each episode, your hosts, Zoya Segelbacher and Caroline Jones, explore the real-life experiences, obstacles, and triumphs of salespeople. With an emphasis on authenticity and storytelling, listeners gain valuable insights into the strategies, mindsets, and skills that drive success in sales. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Rep Matters. This episode is brought to you by Marketers in Demand. Marketers in Demand has in-depth videos, podcasts, and articles from some of B2B's most in-demand marketers. Today, our guest is Jen Allen-Knuth. Jen is the founder of DemandJen and former Chief Evangelist Officer for the Challenger Sale Company. Prior to that, she spent 18 years as an individual contributor, selling over $50 million in professional services as a new logo hunter and account manager. Jen has spoken at sales kickoffs organizations like Amazon Web Services, GE, Coursera, Sendoso, and more. She is also a co-host of the 30 Minutes to President's Club podcast, the #1 most downloaded sales podcast globally. Jen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited to be here. I'm so appreciative you pronounced my last name correctly, and we're going to have a ton of fun. So thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I'll kick it off. DemandJen. I love this because I get to say this for real. Like when people say like, I am her, like she is you, you are her. It is both a brand and a person, a wildly popular brand in sales. So can you tell us a little bit about the origin story of DemandJen?
Yes. So it's a story I think a lot of people can relate to. I think it was back in 2020. I was selling for Challenger and I was responsible for a net new logo. And at the time, we had a really tiny marketing team and they were doing what a lot of marketing teams do, like pushing out a bunch of emails. And I just wasn't seeing a lot of leads. So maybe on average, if I had a good month, I'd get 3 leads. And so I went to my manager, who was one of those total tough love managers, which I actually love in a manager.
I love that too.
And yes. And I remember telling him, I was like, you know what? Marketing isn't giving me any leads and it's totally unfair. And I was just in one of those deep bitching sessions. And he stopped me and he said, look, you're not wrong. You should be getting more leads. But the reality is you're not. And you're not going to change the marketing team overnight. So you can sit here and use our one-on-one to complain with me, or you can figure out how you can go off and create some demand on your own. And I was like, oh, that's not what I wanted to hear in the moment. I wanted the let me go fight that fight and turn this around. But he was right. Nothing he would say or do or I would say or do was going to fix that problem. And so that conversation was really pivotal for me because I realized as a salesperson, I'm accountable for my W-2. I can't point fingers at other people. And so it forced me to reflect on how I was out there creating demand for myself. And it opened my eyes that there was a lot more that I could be doing to serve myself. And so that was kind of the origination of DemandJen as a name.
Nice. Do they start calling you that at work?
So they didn't start calling me that until I quit Challenger. And my boss was like, if you don't make this your business name, you've just failed this completely. And so now it's stuck.
We're glad you didn't miss the message on that one.
Me too.
Let's talk about pre-leaving Challenger, pre-DemandJen for a second. So at CEB for over 14 years, and then M&A activity turned that into 4 more years at Challenger. You have an uncommonly long track record there. Were you ever tempted to leave? Or in other words, what kept you there for 14 years?
I mean, I was tempted to leave every January when the goal reset and my performance was 0. I was like, why am I doing this again? It's been so many years. But the
Yeah.
thing that kept me there was I wasn't selling anything tangible, meaning like there was nothing to demo. Challenger was an idea. It was intellectual property that helped organizations rethink how they went to market, right? And so I think had I been selling a thing, I probably would have been very bored with that thing. But what I realized was when every year I was encountering new companies with different go-to-market challenges. And I think in a way, it just kept me so intellectually stimulated because it wasn't the same conversation over and over again. I'd work with, an insurance company, and then I'd work with a medical device manufacturer, and then I'd work with a SaaS company, and they all had different versions of the same problem. And so I never got intellectually bored. So when that January desire to be like, why am I doing this over again? There was always a good conversation in January that kind of kept me there.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice for individual contributors who start to think about the next step and maybe only see traditional sales leadership as the next step.
Yeah, and I think it's often pushed on us, right? There's this perception that if you stick around in an individual contributor job, you're in some way lazy, which I think is wild because if you get really good at sales, you can make a lot of money, you can have an amazing work-life balance, and it affords you opportunities you just can't have as a people leader. So I'm not lacking people leadership, but I just think a lot of people tend to go into it because they just feel like, all right, I'm stale. I guess I better move up. And I think that's largely why we have so many issues with reps leaving managers is they just never wanted to be managers really to begin with. And that was kind of my story.
Yeah. Can we actually back it up to like a moment ago? You were saying like the birth of DemandJen. You went out and you created demand for yourself. What were some of those things when you got that feedback and you thought about what you could be doing differently? What were some of those things you added to the mix to get those leads?
A big thing was at the time I was doing almost nothing on social. Now, not everybody can do this, but I was really lucky in the sense that I was selling to CROs and sales organizations and sometimes CEOs. And as much as they don't post a lot or even comment a lot, they lurk a lot. And so I looked at that platform and said, I'm completely under leveraging it. All I ever do is when my company forces me to post something, I'm like, fine. And I post it and it's boring and nobody remembers it. It doesn't mean anything. Nobody remembers me as the person posting it. And so I actually had started posting more like research based things. So similar to like a gong, right? We had a ton of research and I would just post it and I wouldn't have an opinion. I'd just be like, here's a study. And Josh Braun, who I totally admire and had been following for a while, reached out to me and was like, hey, can I give you some feedback? And I was like, hell yeah, let's do this. And so he called me and he was like, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but you share very smart things, but you never share your opinion about it. And I have to imagine looking at how long you've sold, you have opinions about this. Why are you such a weenie? And I was like, I don't know. And I thought about it and it was like, I was scared of rejection. I was scared of being called out for having the wrong opinion. And so I was playing it really safe. And so that conversation really was a kick in the butt that I needed. And so I started saying, look, I've been talking for 18 years to heads of sales and CEOs and marketing leaders. What can I say that I know about the problems that would make someone say, hey, that's exactly what we're dealing with here. I don't know if we want to buy anything, but I'd at least like to talk to you because it seems like you've got context that would be helpful. And so I started really leaning into posting problem-centric content, not like, here, buy Challenger because it's the best sales training. I wasn't talking about sales training at all. I was talking about the things that would warrant someone saying, we've got a sales conversation problem. And sure enough, all these lurkers started showing up in my DMs being like, man, we just had this exact conversation. We are doing that exact thing wrong. Again, I don't know that we want to buy something, but I want to talk to you and get your take on what you've seen. And that just became this fuel where I was like almost addicted to it, where I just said, gosh, I'm going to start looking at my day and saying, what conversation do I think is not unique to that company? What can I export? And then how do I attract people? So that generated so much demand, and not just for my own territory. And that was kind of the genesis for how I created the evangelist role, because it got to a point where I'm like, yo, I'm giving leads to everybody else. Like, I might as well formalize it.
Nice. Yeah, that's some show me you know me right there. I know we opened with that phrase. I don't know who coined it. Maybe you two do. But
Sam McKenna.
that it is Sam, right? I thought it was.
Yep. Yeah.
I was waiting for Caroline to say it.
Sam,
but-
if you hear this, please be our guest in a couple of months. Thank you.
We'd love to have you. Nice plug.
Yes. Get her.
Because you're showing them, right? It's not so much like you're showing them that you did a bunch of research in this moment, but you're showing them, I understand the problem that you have, and I'm going to talk about it. And then to the point that they read it and they're compelled to reach out to you like, whoa, you described that perfectly.
Spot on. Couldn't have said that any better.
Yeah, this problem consensus stuff. I have to say, one of the effects of following your career and all the work that you do on LinkedIn for the community, Jen, is it makes me want to get back in the field. Like, well, what if I had aligned them on the problem earlier? There's just so much there that talking about the problem more, getting your buyers to think differently about their issue, and then getting the organization aligned on the problem. One, win rates will go up, right? But two, we would have lost deals so much earlier. They would have been out of the pipeline when they belonged out of the pipeline. You and I have talked a little bit in the DMs about like win reviews and loss reviews. Can you tell us where you think the value is in each of those types of exercises for sales teams?
Yes. And I think often, if a company even does it, which is a big if, it's done at the company level and it's designed to say, okay, like where's a product gap or a pricing gap or a messaging gap? And that's useful. But for me as an individual salesperson, again, I go back to a really great manager who said, if you want to get better and you want to spend less time building proposals for deals that don't close, which was always like my least favorite thing to do, he was like, you've got to look back on what you are saying and doing. Because the crazy thing about sales is more often than not, a customer or prospect will say no because of something we did and how we said it. And then I was like, wow, that's wild. Now I'm like so invested in looking back and saying, let me look for patterns. So what I got in the pattern of doing is at the end of every quarter, like the first week after a quarter closed, I would go back and I would say, let me pull every opportunity I worked, whether I won it, lost it, it was still in motion, or it ghosted me. And then I said, now let me look for patterns within those deals of things I did. And can I come to some conclusions around when I said or did this bad thing happened? And so a perfect example of that was I was on my first call with a prospect, showing up and doing like a little bit of discovery, like, oh, why are you, what are you doing for sales training today? And how's that been going? And like snooze fest stuff. And then as soon as I heard anything I thought we could help with, my happy ears jumped right to like, well, let me show you exactly how we can help with that. And what ended up happening is I wasn't getting deep enough on problems. I wasn't actually understanding, is there even a problem worth solving here? And so my first to second call conversion rate was abysmal. Because of course it was. Who wants to have that conversation? Like, here's a problem. Let me jump on top of you and tell you why, like, I'm your hero and I need to solve it for you. Like, that's icky. And so that was one example of something where I realized I've got to slow down in the first call, because almost every time I did it, those deals ghosted me or said no. And so that's, I think, the value in really thinking critically about ourselves, not pointing the finger and being like, our product's too expensive or it doesn't do this. Those are outside of our control as salespeople. I have literally no control over product or price. What I do have control over is the sales conversation I have. And that became a pattern every quarter where I started doing it and never failed. Every quarter I'd unveil something that I was saying and doing that was actually hurting my outcomes.
Let's talk about ghosting for a second. I think a lot of challenger identified relationship builders could probably identify with that. You built such a great relationship as a seller and prospect, but they're not really maybe serious about buying or aligned on the problem internally. They don't want to say no to you, so they ghost you. I think you've mentioned you're a kind of a recovering relationship builder slash people pleaser. Can you tell us
Yeah.
about where you've grown from there?
For sure. I mean, I started my career in account management. And I think in many ways, as an account manager, we are encouraged to be relationship builders. And don't get me wrong, like relationships will always be an essential currency in sales. In no way do I mean to diminish it. But I was trying to build relationships off the back of being the one who would like return your email or call in 5 minutes. And you ask for X, I give you X plus Y. And I just thought like, oh, I'm just going to over deliver all the time and be so invested in their personal lives and ask about their kids. And like 2008 happened. And I was like, nobody cares. Nobody, like all these people that were my friends are now gone or they're fired. And none of that had helped me. And so I think, if 2008 had not happened when I was carrying a bag, I would have kept on keeping on as a relationship builder. It just forced my hand where I said, if I look at all these relationships, yeah, they were sad about canceling their contracts. They seem to be, but they still canceled their contracts. So a relationship wasn't enough to weather that storm. And so it forced me to say, how do I actually show up in a way that is not cancelable? Well, I've got to start talking about their business and what they're up against and bring new ideas for them because that's the stuff they were actually looking for. They weren't looking for a buddy. They have their own friends. Like they don't need a sales rep to be their bestie.
Yeah. So that, I would imagine part of what went into that transition was speaking more about what you speak a lot about now, the status quo and attacking it. So I
Yeah.
recently saw you post something and I thought it was really interesting because you were calling out, excuse me, you were calling out the fact that some people seem to be confusing a cost of inaction with ROI, or they're almost like repurposing the ROI and rebranding it and calling it that. For our listeners, can you explain the difference between the two and specifically why one is more compelling than the other?
Absolutely. So if we just define it, ROI or return on investment is these great things happen if you do something. COI or cost of inaction is these terrible things happen if you do nothing differently. So if you compare the two, ROI is dependent upon a change, like I buy your solution and this magical stuff happens. COI is not dependent on your solution. So there is a cost of inaction, whether you exist as a business and a solution or not. What I often hear people doing is being like, you're missing out on 10 times the leads, or you're missing out on 10 times the growth if you don't buy X. That's still dependent on someone doing something. Cost of inaction and where the beauty of it lies is, and I think I was very naive to this as a seller for a very long time, is I always assume like you become a C-level executive, you got your shit in order. Like your house is clean and things work the way they're supposed to. But what I failed to appreciate is executives are fighting so many fires. If we look at executives right now, many of them are operating with smaller budgets, leaner teams. They're not sitting in these, boardrooms with whiteboards being like, let's analyze where we're losing and let's do that. They're not. Like, I would love it if they were. They'd probably buy more of our stuff. So if you think about it, CEOs are not sitting in these rooms like whiteboarding and having these really strategic thought sessions as much as they probably would like to be, because they're fighting fires just like everybody else. And so when I reflect on COI is simply coming in, and it's kind of like you've got spinach in your teeth conversation you would have with a friend. Like, you're not like, look at you, you idiot, you have spinach in your teeth. You're just like, you kind of pull them aside and you're like, hey, I know this is kind of embarrassing, but like this thing over here happened and you got some gunk in your mouth. And it's meant to be constructive. And I think that was the thing that really clicked for me with COI is all about helping someone look at their own business and recognize that there's a much bigger cost to the way they've traditionally solved the problem than they realize. But it is not so we can like gotcha and come in and say, and that's why you need our solution. It has to be objective. It has to acknowledge that there's probably 16 ways to solve a problem. If I come in and I'm just trying to get them to see why they need our solution, that COI thing will flop all day long because they don't perceive me as being actually truly trying to help. They perceive it to be, she's in here trying to sell me something. And so when I look at some of these like COI statements, I'm like, God, it's just, you're just flipping ROI on its head and saying, without us, you miss this. With us, you get that. It's very different than that.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think enablement teams, sales leaders, all the way up the chain can do a better job at enabling their sales teams to have these kinds of conversations. I've heard you talk about even your own process for being almost a third party consultant or trusted person that's not just waiting for your turn to pitch DemandJen. Can you tell us about the times that in your job now you send people in another direction?
Oh my God, I do it all the time. I do it all of the time because particularly right now, I think I have to be more choosy. Like, I don't want to work with a client that's a bad fit because I'm the one who has to deliver it. Like, sometimes as salespeople, we're like, yeah, that's somebody else's problem. That's fine. But I think I've always been like that because I've genuinely had good relationships with people I work with, and I never wanted to be that sales rep that threw something over their desk. So I'll give you a perfect example from what I'm doing now. I had a really large enterprise account reach out to me for a keynote at their sales kickoff meeting. And this is a logo like I would have been so damn proud to have. And so as I'm in the conversation, I'm like, okay, let's talk about like what's the overall theme of your kickoff and like what is it that what behavior you want to see out of your reps. And it became very clear that what they had done in the past and what they wanted again was a motivational speaker. And if you look at my website, if you talk to me, if you see what I post, like I don't disagree that I don't think that motivational speakers are bad, but it is not my ICP. Like I'm not the people that are like, we just need our reps working a little bit harder and then we'll hit our goal. I'm out there looking for companies who are like, this stuff's broken and we need a new playbook. And what does that playbook look like? And so I'm hearing them talk and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, I am the wrong person for them. And I could do it. I'm not going to feel good about it. They're not going to feel good about it. And then what do? I ruin this like huge logo. It's probably going to be more harm than good. And so at the middle of the conversation, I just stopped him and I said, listen, I am so appreciative that you thought of me for this. And I do hope there's another occasion where we can work together. But as I'm listening to what you're saying, I'm just not the right person for you. But this person and this person, I think would do a killer job. Would you like me to make an introduction? Who's to say if I ever get business out of that customer, but it's kind of besides the point, right? It's just staying true to, we can't sell things to people that aren't a good fit for what we offer, or I guess we can, but it always ends up biting you in the butt, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that about your approach. I think it's really clear that you always want to come with a point of view. Like whenever you speak on anything, you always have a very strong point of view. I saw a post you made this morning, actually. And I love that I think you called yourself a skeptical dinosaur. um, and I love that in the post, you were really transparent about the thought process that you went through. So to just back up and explain the post that I read, Kyle Coleman invited you onto a webinar about AI, and you were having this internal dialogue about if you were going to do it or not, and why you might and why you wouldn't. And could you kind of share with the listeners who didn't catch that post this morning, the thought process you went through and why you posted it? I got a laugh out of it, and I admired your candor.
Well, thank you. So for those that don't know Kyle Coleman, he used to be the CMO at Clary, right? And now he's at Copy AI. And he's so well respected. And he's someone like I've been fangirling for a long time. So he emailed me and said, hey, I'd love to get you on this webinar with me for how to use AI in sales. I don't even know my Chat GPT password. Like I am, to your point, I'm a giant dinosaur when it comes to tech. And so I got it and I'm like, okay, I could do like a crash course. So I have the opportunity to be on this platform with him, which would be huge for me. Or I could do like literally anything else because that would be a terrible idea and I'm just going to look like a fool. So I said to him, I was like, listen, I'm so flattered. Like this is like a dream come true for me because I really admire you. The problem is I'm an absolute dinosaur when it comes to AI. So I would be lying and making stuff up. And that's not the kind of experience I ever want to deliver. Like I always want to deliver a really powerhouse point of view. So then I gave him an alternative idea and said, well, what if instead of me coming in and making shit up about how I use AI, what if I came in and said, look, I represent probably a lot of your prospects, which is I'm super skeptical over AI and I don't use it and I probably should. and I'm willing to consider a different point of view. So why don't I bring that and you can see if you can change my mind on some stuff. And he came back and he was like, dude, this is a great idea because that's the type of customer we need to convert. Like you represent what we are up against. And so it ended up just by being true to myself and not trying to be someone I wasn't. We ended up with, I think, a much better conversation that I'll do a much better job at and will probably deliver a much better outcome for him too.
So cool.
That's
Well, you
awesome.
already represent like the average salesperson, right? In the way that you run your business, you're the one who's made all the mistakes, the one who you want to pass back the learnings. So I think we
Yes.
can all really appreciate learning that way. We can see ourselves
Yeah.
in you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm curious to go back a little bit. You've mentioned a couple of times some managers, maybe some tough love that you've received in the past. And of course, over your career, you've had people influence you in some ways. What's the balance between emulating or learning from managers, mentors, things like that, and staying true to yourself, as you mentioned, like being yourself? How do you navigate balancing that kind of personal growth?
By the way, like I'm going to break the fourth wall and just say, like, I need to take a lesson from both of you in asking amazing questions. You're asking me coolest questions that I have not been asked before. Um, so I
Very
struggled with
kind.
this because I never considered myself a natural salesperson. So I remember in the first few years of selling, I was always looking at the number one salesperson who was a woman, go women, and being like, how do I show up more like her? Problem was, she and I were totally different. Like this woman would be the woman that's like, my food doesn't taste good. I'm raising my hand and I'm like letting everybody know. She'd kick down a door. And I was just like, I would literally eat bad food over telling someone like I didn't like their food. So I was like sitting there saying to myself, there's just no way you're going to ever be like her because you're so different than her. So your sales style cannot be like hers, or else you're going to come across completely inauthentic and people are going to call you out and they're going to know. And so the reason I refer to my managers a lot is because I never had a manager tell me, you need to be more like so-and-so. I always had managers who looked at me and said, here's your strengths, here's your weaknesses. If you want to be really good, you got to conquer these weaknesses and I'll give you some ideas, but you've just got to experiment as much as possible and find something that's comfortable for you. And so in many ways, like one, I don't think I would have stayed in sales as long as I did if I didn't have these amazing managers. But two, I think, when I look at other people and I look at, particularly right now, where I think some people get really, doe-eyed at like, oh, I want to go work for X company. I want to hold them and be like, it is not about the company. It is about the person that you work for and what they are willing to do with you and help you coach and how great of a coach and whether they're willing to admit mistakes and whether they have a growth mindset. Like I will sell a shit product all day long over sell an amazing product for a terrible manager because it's that, in my opinion, it is that important. And we are so on our own when it comes to our development and sales. We're not lawyers. We're not doctors. We don't get years of education. So I just think like I will die on that hill. I think it's so incredibly important.
How do you recommend that people interview for that? Like right now, a lot of people feel that it's a company driven market, right? And we're lucky to
Yeah.
have jobs in tech and sales these days. But I would assume we should still be rigorously interviewing managers. How can you suss out whether this person will be your advocate and challenge you and bring out the best in you?
So two things. So one would be I would ask tell me about a time. So use your behavioral interview questions on you, hiring manager.
Yeah.
Tell me about a time when you had an employee that you thought had a lot of potential, but was having consistent performance issues. How did you raise it with them? What did you do together? And what was the outcome? And I think you can tell very easily by someone's answer if one, the story is genuine, or two, like if it was because of them and their coaching, or if it was because like that sales rep just turned it around. So I would look for really good specifics around that. I would ask hard questions around it because in sales, I don't think I've ever met a salesperson who's been consistently awesome their entire career. We will always fall into a pit, and I need to know that my manager is going to help me help myself get out of it. So that would be number one. And then the second question I would ask them is like, what is the number one thing you want to work on for your own development this year? And then I'd pay attention to how quickly they answered, because anybody can come up with some BS answer on the fly. I think people who are truly growth minded can give you a quick answer. And that would be a signal to me that this person isn't someone who feels like they know everything. This is someone who's also revisiting their own beliefs and assumptions and pushing themselves. So two things I think that I would do if I was going to another company.
Those are good. We definitely have a lot of listeners who are interviewing, so I think these will come in handy. I love that you call out that it's not always about the company, because I feel like I've been at Gong for 3 years. I love the company. I love the product. And so do a lot of my coworkers. And I actually think I have spent a lot of time on the other end of the spectrum, because I'm also grateful. It is really nice when you can get the match, right? But yeah, that's a really good perspective that I don't think I talk enough about when I'm speaking with people who are interviewing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not about the company anymore, because this is going to be a rant.
Again,
I mean, we're in a situation where everyone from tiny startups to huge companies and great places to work are doing layoffs, right? So there is no such thing as that kind of security anymore. But if we're the asset, then we need to find somewhere where our asset's going to appreciate. And that is only, I think, through the people that we surround ourselves with. But I've been in situations where, even my last sales job, I didn't know who my manager would be until I was out of onboarding. And so, everyone seemed great and I was people pleasing. So I was like, I'll work for any of you. Put me on whatever team, we'll be fine. And so it's such a different way of thinking about things. I hope that candidates remember their power during times like this and keep building those relationships.
that needs to be on a t-shirt. Remember your power, because and I do empathize. Like, if you've been out of work for a while and you're like, I just need a job, I understand why we start to diminish some of the things that are important to us. But I don't think anybody is better served by a job that they get for 2 months and then they get let go because they're working for someone who does not have their back. And so it's easier said than done when you're not job hunting. But I just think it is so, so important for people to remember, like, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and you deserve to be treated well. You deserve to be coached. You deserve to have an honest answer on what you are walking into. And I think in many ways, if I was a hiring manager, I would want that sales rep who's asking those hard questions, because then I can envision they're doing the same thing with their prospects, and that I respect. So I don't think anyone should worry about being quote unquote difficult. The right company will never call you difficult if you ask hard questions.
Right. This can actually lead you to making sure you're hired in the right place, because I do think hiring managers would be impressed by that. Changing gears a little bit, so I'm really curious about this. Obviously, layoff rant aside, other kinds of mergers, acquisitions, and different chapters in a company's journey happen all the time. And you were on board when CEB was acquired and then Challenger was spun off from the business. So what role did you play as an individual contributor salesperson in those chapters in your company's journey?
Another great question I've never been asked. So I played absolutely zero role when CEB got acquired by Gartner. I remember waking up in my childhood bedroom because I was home visiting my family, reading an email like, we're being acquired by Gartner. And I was like, oh my God, what does this mean? Because we were this like mid-sized company now being acquired by, I don't know, it was like a $2 billion company at the time. And that actually was a moment of realization, not that moment, but like the months that came after we got acquired, was a realization I did not want to be a cog in a wheel. And this is no knock against Gartner. Like, I still have a lot of stock in Gartner. Like, they have a great business model. But I realized very quickly, I don't want to be someone that's like, just shush and go sell your stuff. And like, we got it from here. And that's the way I felt in that business. I think because of the contrast of CEB, which was very much like meritocracy, you speak up, you got an idea, like you share it. And Gartner was just too big for that. Again, no knock against them. It was just too big. And so when we were sold, our division was sold to private equity. That was completely different. That was like they were tapping me on the shoulder to say, can you talk to this PE firm? They have questions for you. And I was like, okay. And then I showed up in this room. It was like 8 dudes in suits. Like, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And it was intimidating as hell. but that was cool to be a part of that. But then after they acquired us, it was essentially like we were, and I don't think I appreciated this before it, but we were part of this big organization that had a finance team and a marketing team and an HR team, and everything worked. And then you get acquired and spun off as your own business. And it was like, we were like, where are our paychecks? And like, who do I even go to for stuff? And so I went from like mid-sized company to big enterprise company to essentially start up with an established brand. And I knew that I actually really liked that because I like the opportunity to speak up and I like the opportunity to respectfully disagree and say, we're doing this way. And here's what I've noticed how it happens when we do this way. And I've got an idea for how we can change it. And you can do that in a smaller organization. So yeah, when we were acquired by Gartner, I had no role. And then it was the exact opposite when we were spun off to private equity.
Yeah, you almost like went backwards, like back into
Yeah.
seed stage.
Yeah,
Do you have
totally.
any advice for salespeople who might be going through? I mean, your situation was unique because you did both within a few years,
Mhm.
but any advice for salespeople going through some kind of major change?
Yeah, I think don't stay just because you're comfortable, which again, I appreciate is easy to say, hard to do. But if you are let's say you're at a mid-sized company and you're acquired by a much bigger firm and you notice some drastic cultural differences, like your gut is telling you what you need to do. And those things do not get better. They're not different. And so if you feel like I joined this company because I liked this about the size of the company, the way the company operates, and now I'm being acquired by a company that's totally different, do not trick yourself into believing like you'll be happy. You know what makes you happy and what you don't. So intentionally seek out opportunities. It does not mean you have to leave, but there is nothing wrong with looking at other businesses that fit more of the mold that you like and just exploring it versus waiting to be laid off or waiting to have like really uncomfortable conversations. Just be proactive.
Yeah. I've got a question that isn't necessarily I guess it's non sequitur, but it came up. It came up. You hate upfront contracts. Why? Tell us more about that. Because that one is I feel like I talk to a lot of people who love upfront contracts. I myself have been known to teach an upfront contract.
Oh,
No, I'm not offended. Educate me. Educate me.
Yeah,
It's a
this is
personal
not an echo
preference.
chamber, so we can
Yes,
disagree in this
okay.
room. We're good.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. It is a preference, right? I'm not saying a contract is wrong or not. For me, what I dislike about it is I feel it is very unnatural to show up to someone you don't know and then start telling them how they're going to behave in a conversation. Like to me, that just made me always feel like, okay, hi, welcome. We're going to spend 10 minutes on this and then that. And then is that, okay, we're doing, okay, now let me go. And it always felt to me like a seller trying to establish dominance. And I don't think dominance is actually helpful in sales. I think being able to open a call and say, look, I don't work within your four walls. I have spent some time preparing for this and I've got a point of view that might be right or wrong. And here's how we're going to, like, I was thinking about spending our time, but, tell me what you were expecting. I just think is way more natural to how I would meet someone at a party. And I constantly think about how unnatural we behave in sales, things we would do in sales that we never would do in our real lives. And I think that's what drives my dislike. But I wrote a post about it like last year and I never had so many people coming for me about upfront. Like people were mad. I was like, yo, it's just my opinion. I didn't say they're wrong. It's not for me.
Yeah. I like that take. Yeah, it's so interesting because for me, I can be very casual and I can be there's like something about my personality that's like a little bit soft. Like I get the feedback like, "Oh, you're very approachable." Which I think is a strength, but also like sometimes in sales, right? Depending on who you're selling to, you are selling to like very dominant personalities. And so I have like found my own balance or actually internal selling is actually where I feel like I need them the most sometimes. Especially in enablement. Like sometimes I would come into a meeting without thinking about an upfront contract because again, like I'm a very casual person. I have the gist of, what we're going to do. I'm going to show them the agenda slide. And then I was consistently getting feedback that like I wasn't authoritative enough. So I think that's why I like have leaned into them and why I've taught people to use them. But I do agree with you, like, especially like depending on how it's delivered.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like people are just like looking for you to like shake your head and be like, yeah, let's do your way.
Yeah. I think that's a good point that you make, which is it's all in the delivery. It's just I don't want to sound like a sales rep in my call. Like thing I wish I would have started doing earlier in my career is just being far more intentional about like how do most sales reps sound and how do I not sound like that? Because it was always the opposite. I was like, how do great sales reps sound? Let me sound just like them. And then I realized all you're doing is making yourself a little bit unforgettable. So again, with upfront contracts, I'm not saying they're wrong. I think it is all about the delivery. It's just it hasn't been my style for years to use them.
Yeah, I love it. I love that take.
Jen,
You're also blowing my mind.
Right, I know.
Because I've spent so much time talking about what do the best sales reps do. The data shows, and now I'm thinking some of the best. The data also shows some of the best reps who have the top performing calls don't, they bend the rules to fit them.
Amen.
Jen, I have a hunch that something that maybe helped you find your non-salesy voice was writing, based on how I've heard you talk about writing. I cannot, Zoya's going to kill me because I cannot talk about writing enough in sales lately. So I've heard you say that this is a process of helping you uncover what you don't know about something, right? And that will help you identify gaps in your sale. I do think it's underappreciated in sales, especially with AI. Don't worry, I won't ask you any AI questions.
Like,
can you think
Go
of
to the
any...
webinar?
I don't know anything.
Yeah. Can you think of any other quote unquote soft skills that are underappreciated in sales?
Yes. So a common one I think a lot of people would say is active listening. I think it's really hard to be an effective salesperson if you're always thinking about what you're going to say. But the second one I would say, and this is again something I didn't appreciate early on that I grew to appreciate, is your ability to be a conversation facilitator. And so what I mean by that is a lot of my deals that were, 6-figure, 7-figure deals would require a bunch of people at the prospect to say yes or not say no. And I used to be like, okay, I got this champion. They're hot and bothered about it. Like they're senior. They're going to go sell this in. And I lost a lot of deals that way, right? Because it is not their full-time job. And I never should have put that on them. And so what I learned was to be really good, to stop losing deals at the point where the champion was socializing it. I had to start treating those conversations differently, such that I still was leaning on a champion. I'm not talking for them, but I started doing group meetings with the buying committee, which was often like, 6 different business unit VPs of sales. And then you got a sales ops person, you got a sales enablement person, maybe you got a leader over all of them. And they're all in there and they're never together. And they always have like different opinions around what's important and what we should be prioritizing and what we should do and we shouldn't do. And so if I come into that meeting and I'm like, all right, everybody, here's your problem and here's the best solution, I'm going to lose every single one of them. And so what I realized is I needed to get comfortable with facilitating a conversation where I was inviting disagreement, meaning I am inviting someone to disagree with my champion's opinion of the problem. I'm inviting someone to disagree with the ideas that I have around how urgent this problem might be. And that's hard because I think for many of us in sales, we grew up learning our jobs are to be great presenters. You hear this all the time. Like people interview and they're like, oh, they were a great presenter. Okay, that's great if you're standing on a stage. It's not great if you're trying to get a group of people to agree on something because people tend to disagree a lot. So facilitation became the skill that I was not good at the beginning. I worked really hard at it. And I think as a result, I just saw a lot less deals slip into like no decision or status quo because I was able to get a group of people to agree. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, good answer.
I
have a question. I know. We're getting to the end. I have a pressing question that is not sales related, but I didn't get the memo. I didn't wear a graphic tee. Can I hear what's on everyone's t-shirt?
Caroline,
Jen,
you
you
go
first.
first.
No, you go first.
Damn it. You get 2 people pleasers on a call and then look what happens. Well, you made my day, ladies.
Oh, I love it. Mine is, I hope this finds you well. It is a Will Aiken merch piece because we always mock starting emails that way. So I love it.
Good.
Yes. I'm so glad I asked. Two great ones.
Final
we're getting to
question.
the end. Yes,
Yeah.
you do it. You
Go
got-
for it, Zoya.
No, I opened it. You go for it. I'm not even a people pleaser. I want you to have it.
I'm taking this entire call so personally. Okay. Jen, 5 years from now, we see
Oh.
your name in headlines for following your passion and doing something big. What's the headline?
It would be, I raised just a shit ton of money for dogs without homes. It would be some big event that I put on and all this money goes to dogs that need rescue. That would be, I would feel really good about myself if I could make that happen.
Wow.
Great answer.
That's a really good one. That's a different answer. You've talked about getting different questions from us. That's definitely a new answer for us.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Nothing to do with sales. Well, a little bit to do with sales, I guess, if I could sell tickets.
Yeah, your sales powers.
You know, it was funny. I actually, when I was only a few years into my career, sales career, I was selling to CMOs. And I remember there was a new CMO, I think it was at Target. And I was so freaked out to get on this call because I was like, what am I doing? Like, what's he going to like know from me? And he got on that call and he was like, I was like, what brought you to Target? And then I immediately was like, of course he goes to Target. It's like the coolest brand ever. But he goes, actually, it's my last stop in my career because my end goal is to create a rescue shelter for dogs that are like hospice dogs, like end of their life. I literally started crying on this call. I was like, it's so beautiful. Now I like look back and I'm like, I want to be him. I want to be that dude. He was so cool.
And that was the day you stopped setting up front contracts because you just couldn't.
Yes.
Well, this one is actually the last question. I really kind of want to ask about the dogs, but we'll connect. We'll connect after to talk about dogs. What do you want to put on everyone's radar? What are you promoting? What do you know about that you think people should know about? And where can our listeners find you?
I had a tiny stint on TikTok and then I removed myself from that platform very quickly. So my main place that I hang out is LinkedIn. I spend way too much time there, but Jen Allen-Knuth on there. And then as far as upcoming stuff, the thing I've been really loving is I feel like a lot of companies are bringing back a focus on fundamentals. So what is the message we're using? How are we defeating status quo? How are we reaching out to people? And I'm so very here for it. I think the last few years, it's just been like taken for granted. Like, oh, you're a sales rep. You just go figure that stuff out. And I'm starting to work with a lot of companies who are like, that's a lot to put on a sales rep. So that's where I've been spending a lot of my time is helping organizations better manage that front end of the sales process, which I love because I think how you open is how you win.
Yeah. Love it.
Amazing. Jen, we can't thank you enough. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on Rep Matters today.
And can I just like break the fourth wall one more time and say this whole episode was like a lesson in how you show up to a conversation and make the person on the end of the call feel like you really care. Like your specificity and the posts that you pull out and the things that you said, like the way you ask those questions. This is why I love podcasts because I'm like, that is what a great sales call sounds like. So kudos to both of you. This was seriously a joy.
That
Thank
means
you.
the world to us. Thank you.
We were fangirling very much. Part of when you first jumped on, we were like, we should just start the recording right away. It's because Caroline and I talked to each other and we were like, we're so excited. We're like kind of going to fangirl. We might as well just get it on camera. Like, don't waste that before we're filming. So
you're awesome.
Yeah, Caroline, you wore the right shirt.
Yeah.
You made my day. Seriously,
Thanks,
thank you so much
Jen.
for having me on. This was a joy.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Rep Matters, the podcast for sales professionals who become top performers. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow Rep Matters wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or access all episodes at marketersindemand.com/repmatters. See you next time.